Welcome to my podcast, where I will discuss the topic of digital creators and algorithmic nationalism in Canada. When people think about platforms like TikTok and Instagram, they often imagine them as spaces for creativity, entertainment, and everyday self-expression. Users share short videos, personal stories, humor, and commentary about their lives. On the surface, these platforms appear informal and spontaneous, but for digital content creators, these platforms are also structured environments that shape visibility, recognition, and income. Whether a post reaches a few hundred viewers or hundreds of thousands often depends on algorithmic systems that rank, categorize, and distribute content across user feeds. So, in other words, visibility online is rarely accidental. It is mediated by algorithms that determine which creators are seen and which remain relatively invisible. At the same time, questions about national culture and identity continue to circulate within digital environments. In Canada, recent debates about promoting Canadian culture online have increased awareness among creators about how their content is categorized and circulated on global platforms. This raises an important question. How do Canadian digital creators experience and understand algorithmic visibility associated with national identity in their everyday use of social media? Rather than treating algorithms as purely technical systems, this project approaches them as social infrastructures that creators interpret and negotiate in their everyday practices of content creation. Drawing on digital ethnography and research on digital labor, I argue that Canadian creators interpret algorithmic visibility through everyday experiences of audience reach, engagement, metrics, and platform feedback. Through these interpretations, creators adjust how they present themselves online. In doing so, national identity often becomes embedded in routine creative decisions. Before examining how algorithms shape creator experiences, it's helpful to start with a broader discussion about how identity appears in media. There's a concept by Stuart Hall in Representation, Meaning, and Language, published in 1997, that is really helpful here: representation. Hall argues that media does not simply reflect reality. Instead, media actively produces meaning about the world. As Hall explains on page 16, representation is the production of meaning through language. So, what does this mean in the context of digital creators? It means that when creators post videos, images, or captions, they are not simply documenting their day-to-day lives. They are participating in the construction of meaning about identity, culture, and everyday experience. But here's the catch. In digital environments, these representations do not circulate freely. Instead, they are filtered through algorithmic infrastructures that determine which content becomes visible to audiences. This means that identity online is shaped not only by creators themselves, but also shaped by the technological systems that organize digital visibility. If representation shapes how identities appear in media, it also shapes how national identities are communicated and understood. This brings us to Benedict Anderson's concept of imagined communities, which he discusses in his work, The Origins of National Consciousness, published in 2006. Anderson argues that nations function as communities because people imagine themselves as connected to others they will never meet. As he explains on page 44, print capitalism allowed speakers of various dialects to comprehend one another, and in the process, they gradually became aware of the hundreds of thousands, even millions, of people in their particular language field, and at the same time, that only those hundreds of thousands or millions belonged. People feel connected to fellow citizens through these shared unified fields of exchange and communication, which is basically shared media. Digital platforms today reinforce these imagined communities by allowing users to circulate cultural references and everyday experiences that resonate with national audiences. For Canadian creators, this might mean making references to culture, humor about Canadian weather, or shared cultural experiences. But nationalism does not always appear through explicit political speech. It can appear in much smaller and more ordinary ways. Sociologists John Fox and Cynthia Miller-Idris call this everyday nationhood in their 2008 article. Rather than focusing on state institutions or political rhetoric, if we look at page 537, Fox and Miller-Idris argue that national identity is a practical accomplishment of ordinary people that is reproduced through routine activities. As they explain, the discursive construction of the nation often occurs through routine talk and interaction. So, in other words, nationalism often appears through ordinary activities that may not seem political at all. In digital environments, these practices include storytelling, humor, and cultural references shared through everyday content creation. Creators may not explicitly intend to represent national identity, yet their content can still communicate cultural experiences that audiences recognize as specific to a national context. So far, we have been thinking about how identity and national belonging appear through everyday cultural practices. But in digital environments, these practices are also shaped by another powerful force, platform algorithms. Anthropologist Zoe Glatt's 2023 ethnographic study of influencers demonstrates how creators interpret algorithms as influential actors in their professional lives. Glatt explains on page 544 that YouTube's algorithmic recommendation system, known as the algorithm, is a powerful character in the lives of professional and aspiring social media content creators. This system utilizes various pressures on them as they struggle for visibility and income within the influencer industry. Creators therefore spend considerable time trying to interpret how the algorithm works. Glatt also notices on page 544 that some creators are subject to algorithmic discrimination, which she defines as a process whereby certain content, identities, and positionalities within the platform economy are deprioritized from recommendation. This means that visibility online is unevenly distributed and is often based on a logic of profitability that privileges brand-safe creators who are white, heteronormative, and middle class. For creators, this uncertainty generates a constant need to interpret platform feedback and adjust their strategies accordingly. This process of interpretation becomes clearer when we look at how users describe their experiences with algorithms. We're going to take a look into Andreas Schellwald's, a sociocultural researcher's, work in understanding the popularity and affordances of TikTok through user experiences. Specifically, we're going to be looking at pages 1569 to 1577. He describes TikTok's For You page as an algorithmically personalized content feed that curates videos based on user behavior. However, users do not simply accept these systems passively. As he explains, algorithms shape but never fully determine user behavior. Instead, users develop everyday theories about how algorithm works. Creators experiment with posting, schedules, trending formats, and storytelling styles in order to increase their visibility. Instead of seeking platform visibility, users engage in reading for personalization, actively navigating the feed to ensure it reflects their own tastes and identity. Through these experiments, creators attempt to align their content with what they believe the platform rewards. Now, I want to look at an article from 2019 by Scott Ross called Being Real on Fake Instagram. It's a great piece because on page 360, Ross argues that we all develop these media ideologies, which he defines as people's beliefs and attitudes and strategies about the media they use and the assumptions that people hold about how a medium accomplishes communicative tasks. These ideologies shape how creators think about engagement. As Ross notes, that media ideologies about Instagram create new ways of using the app that have their own aesthetics, publics, and messages. So, if we look further into the article, on page 363 and 364, Ross shows something I think we can all relate to. We start associating likes with actual quality. So we get to a point where we might even conflate our own opinion of what a good picture is with whatever we think is going to get the most likes. Ultimately, platform use is guided by both technical and social factors, as Instagram features structure what is worthy through the expectation of likes, an image's likes potential. This suggests that creators form specific ideas about what the platform values and adjust their content to maximize its value within this visual economy. Now, these interpretations we've been talking about, they don't just stay in the creator's head. They actually change how people present themselves online. I want to bring in some research by Joshua Bluteau from 2025, Crafting the Digital Self, Exploring Instagram Self-Portraiture as an Anthropological Endeavor, which focuses on Instagram and self-presentation. He shows us how creators are essentially constructing these digital identities through really carefully curated images and stories. If you look at page 509, Bluteau argues that to actually gain acceptance on a platform, creators have to perform this tricky balancing act. They have to balance being authentic with the performance they need to put on to meet what they think the platform expects from them. So what this means is that digital identity isn't just being yourself. It becomes a strategic practice. You have to appear authentic to your audience, but at the exact same time, you're producing content that's designed to align with algorithmic visibility. You're playing to two different crowds, the humans and then the code. Maintaining this level of visibility produces significant pressure. I want to look at a recent piece published in 2025 called Digital Genealogy by Gil Batista Ferreira. He argues that we now operate within prosumer capitalism, a system that turns our daily self-expression into unpaid digital labor. If you look at page 10, Ferrer explains the pursuit of recognition on these platforms leads to subjective exhaustion because users feel an internalized compulsion to optimize the self. This creates a relentless cycle where the absence of publication is interpreted as invisibility and invisibility as irrelevance. This really highlights the emotional and digital labor involved. Because visibility is closely tied to monetization and brand opportunities, these pressures are not only social but also economic. As he continues on page 11, we aren't just creating. We are caught in a regime of self-exploitation where we must constantly monitor algorithmic metrics like likes and shares and then discipline and expose ourselves just to maintain our standing in the digital ecosystem. It's no longer just a hobby, it's never-ending work. Not only do we have to think about the burnout, but also about how digital platforms shape identities circulate publicly. There is some important research by Yarimar Bonilla and Jonathan Rosa from 2015 that helps us understand this. On page 5 of their article, #Ferguson, they argue that hashtags function as classificatory tools that organize discourse online. They note that hashtags operate in ways similar to library call numbers because they categorize and retrieve content within digital publics. Through these classificatory systems, platforms structure how identities and issues become visible. For creators, these systems shape how their content reaches audiences and how those audiences interpret their work. So, to really get into these dynamics, I decided to take a digital ethnography approach for this project, which is a way to examine how cultural practices actually emerge inside digital environments. I'm drawing on the work of Natalie Underberg and Elaine Zorn here. In Chapter 1 of their 2013 book on digital ethnography, they argue that digital ethnography combines ethnographic storytelling with new media analysis in order to understand how culture is expressed through digital forms. What I find most interesting, and they mention this on page 18, is the idea that digital media environments function as storied places, where identity and experience are narrated through repeated digital practices. For this project, I observed 10 Canadian creator accounts across TikTok and Instagram. In total, approximately 80 posts and videos were looked at. These creators produce contents in areas such as lifestyle, humor, and commentary. I was paying very close attention to moments where creators discussed audience reach, engagement, metrics, or experiences with the algorithm. Instead of analyzing algorithms technically, the goal was to understand how creators interpret algorithmic visibility in their everyday practices. So, across the content examined, creators frequently referred to the algorithm in everyday language. Many describe themselves as working with the algorithm or trying to beat the algorithm. These expressions should suggest that algorithmic systems become embedded in everyday creator discourse. Another pattern I observed was how creators frequently monitor engagement metrics such as views, likes, and comments. When a post receives higher engagement, creators often interpret this as confirmation that their content has been favored by the algorithm. So these metrics therefore become signals that guide future content decisions. Some creators also discuss audience feedback directly in their videos, commenting on where their viewers are located or which cultural references resonate most strongly. For example, creators often respond to comments from viewers identifying as Canadian, which reinforces a sense that their content reflects shared national experiences. When engagement increases, creators may interpret this as evidence that the algorithm has promoted their content. So when engagement declines, they might assume that their content has been deprioritized or that they have been shadow banned. A couple examples that stood out to me when observing the content creators were, one, a creator posted something about wanting to get an iced coffee in the middle of a snowstorm, which is a classic Canadian struggle. This creator noticed that their content only spiked in Ontario. So these moments demonstrate how creators interpret algorithmic visibility through the lens of cultural recognition, connecting engagement patterns to national identity. And two, a creator talked about how they felt that they had to discipline themselves, which relates back to Ferreira's idea of self-exploitation by using specific Canadian hashtags because they did not want their content to get lost in the global feed. Creators also often discuss audience location, noting whether their viewers appear primarily Canadian or international. So through these interpretations, creators begin linking visibility with cultural identity and audience recognition. This is where the concept of everyday nationhood becomes especially useful. Rather than appearing through explicit nationalist messaging, national identity emerges through routine cultural references and shared experiences. When creators notice that their content resonates with Canadian audiences, they may incorporate cultural elements that reinforce this connection. This ties back to what we saw earlier in Fox and Miller-Idris on page 537, that nationalism is a practical accomplishment. When these Canadian creators see the algorithm pushing their Winter in Canada videos, they aren't just gaining followers, they are practically accomplishing the national connection. Through these everyday practices, algorithmic visibility becomes linked to national belonging. It shows that the imagined community Anderson talks about is being built post by post through the way the algorithm chooses to distribute these cultural moments. This raises an important question for the future of digital media. If algorithms shape what becomes visible, how much control do creators have over how their identities circulate online? To wrap things up, digital platforms are not neutral environments for creativity. They are infrastructures that shape visibility, recognition, and identity. This research suggests that Canadian creators experience algorithms as powerful but unpredictable systems that influence their reach and audience. Through everyday experimentation and interpretation, creators adjust their identities and creative strategies in response to algorithmic feedback. At the same time, national identity often appears indirectly through routine storytelling, humor, and cultural references. Understanding how creators interpret algorithms therefore provides insight into how digital media shapes identity and belonging in contemporary society. Ultimately, algorithms are not simply technical tools. They are social systems embedded within everyday digital life.